President Trump is doing his damnedest to turn around the economy, revitalising jobs and bring back prosperity. But the larger trends are already in place. The cycle is turning and the bust cannot be put off forever. Federal Reserve policy has literally set the country up for economic collapse. And though the central bank has been very creative in making the impossible work and putting off disaster, nothing can hold back the flood forever. Unfortunately, it looks like Trump may be blamed for a financial crisis that he didn't cause. Analysts, including notably Brandon Smith, may be correct in pinpointing the attempt to use the new and highly controversial president as a scapegoat for the dirty work of the bankers. The conditions are there, and the consequences were built in when the bubble was still being pumped up. Someday it will burst. When, how, and how bad remains to be seen. If Ron Paul is correct and economic doomsday is here, the second financial bubble is going to soon burst, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. That's because, as Paul stated, the Federal Reserve has set up the American economy for financial collapse, for printing trillions of dollars back in 2008 and 2009. The Federal Reserve's policies of printing trillions of dollars back in 08-09 have locked into place a serious financial crisis at some point in our future. Paul stated, getting so far as to intimate the financial collapse will occur at least sometime in the next 2 years. Paul wrote, "It's unavoidable, and even Donald Trump can't stop it." Paul said Trump will be the patsy for the supposed impending financial ruin. Just like everyone blamed Obama for the financial collapse in 2009, this time Trump will unfairly get the blame. The former Texas representative wrote, Paul bases his comments on reports he says he's read which concludes that within the next 18 to 24 months, the collapse will happen. The former congressman further explained he's still holding out hope for Trump to make changes, which can help to protect America's future, but pinpointed out some of Trump's staff has direct connections to Wall Street. He's also concerned Trump's war against radical Islam is a war Trump cannot win because it's a war against ideology, much like America's failed attempt of defeating communism.
We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth.
Paul believes Trump's moving in the right direction to protect America's interests by cancelling America's involvement in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, trade agreement with Asia.
President Donald Trump has just signed an executive order to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal.
We've been talking about this for a long time. Thank you. Okay.
Paul also hopes Trump will pull American troops out of at least 7 countries in which it is currently deployed and engaged in military conflict. I say just come home. Paul said when addressing having our military presence overseas, just get out of there and let the local people sort this out. Paul said in response to how America should deal with hotspots like the Ukraine and Syria. Paul believes the former administration's posturing and threatening of China was misguided and stated we'd be better off trading goods with China and all of Asia rather than trading threats. However, As the Free Thought Project pointed out, Trump is already carrying out this dangerous posture, and China is responding. Paul warns there's going to be an acceleration of black ops operations by the CIA and Special Forces, missions such as the Joint Special Operations Command, which, as the Free Thought Project has reported, answers directly to the President of the United States. Paul, who has never supported Trump, is concerned about Trump's ego, wondering if he's going to act on his impulses to go after the ideology of radical Islam. Paul reminded his viewers that the way to create more jihadists is to keep on provoking the moderate Muslims into becoming radicalized by reacting to US military actions overseas, the exact same thing Trump is doing right now. Paul praised President Obama's actions to normalize relations with Cuba, and he hopes that with all of the policy decisions the Trump administration is making, that Trump will maintain the policy Obama implemented with Cuba and continue to keep the negotiations open with our closest Southern Caribbean neighbor. Ron Paul noted that he thinks US policy has created a failed system in the country. All empires end, and we're the empire. It's going to end, and it's going to be for economic reasons. We're going to fail because we're working with a failed system. This is monetary problem, a spending problem. It's going to be financial, Paul emphatically claimed, once again stating the collapse of America is imminent. We have something arriving worse than 2008, 2009, much worse. It was the fault of the Federal Reserve, Paul said, adding the Keynesian economic model contributed greatly to the first bubble burst. Paul said the left will blame Trump for it like the right did to Obama, but he says it's bigger than the office of the president and blames the Federal Reserve and the previous 17 years of governmental spending. If you think Ron Paul's comments hold no water, think again. As the Free Thought Project reported last year, even the former chairman of the Federal Reserve is predicting the crisis. We are in very early days of a crisis which has a way to go, asserted Alan Greenspan to Bloomberg last year. This is the worst period I recall since I've been in a public service. There's nothing like it, including the crisis. Remember October 19th, 1987, when the Dow Jones went by a record 23%? That, I thought, was the bottom of all potential problems. This has a corrosive effect that will not go away. I'd love to find something positive to say. I don't know how it's going to resolve, but there's going to be a crisis. When the man who used to run every central bank, Ron Paul, says it's responsible for the collapse, also says there's going to be a collapse, it's time to pay attention.
Just as Mises lectured many, many years before communism failed, he explained why socialism always fails and communism would fail, and we didn't have to have a fight and a war with him. So, but the same rules apply to Keynesianism, interventionism, Federal Reserve inflationism, militarism. It fails. All empires end, and we're the empire. And it's going to end. It's going to be for economic reasons. It's not because the Russians are coming, and it's not going to be because the Chinese are coming, and the Iranians aren't going to get us. And we're going to fail because we're working with a failed system, especially in this century. In the last 17 years, it's been a disaster. And Trump was able to recognize this and go to the people who have suffered the most. But this is a monetary problem. This is a spending problem. This is a foreign policy problem. And that is what's going to bring us down. Is going to be financial, and it's going to be associated with horrendous increases in spending and also inflation. And yet we still have a policy where they deliberately try to devalue
In closing,
dollar,
how long do you think Trump has to try to reverse that, because we're so far down the road? I know he's making hundreds of calls a day to get jobs back. He does want to cut taxes. He also wants to cut spending. I mean, what needs to be done to right the ship?
Well, I'll tell you what, he has a short amount of time, and I think he's sincerely trying. And when he talks about taxes and regulation, I think he's doing a great job. But the whole thing is, let's say there are some dire predictions that, you know, in next year, or say a year and 18 months, we have something arriving worse than 2008 and 2009. The downturn is much worse. And they'll say, it's all Trump's fault, it's all Trump's fault. No, it wasn't. 08 and 09 wasn't Obama's fault. It was the fault of the Federal Reserve. It was the fault of the Keynesian economic model, the spending too much, the deficit. So unfortunately, there's nothing he can do. Trump can't do it. He can help, you know, by some of these policies, but you can't avoid the correction. The correction is locked in place because the deficits are there, the malinvestment. Everybody agrees.
That's right.
Interest rates have been too low, too long,
and that's why he's racing.
The only thing he can do is allow the recession to come and get it over with, liquidate the debt. Politically, nobody wants that, so you're going to see runaway inflation before you see this country wake up.
Remains to be seen. If Ron Paul is correct and economic doomsday is here, the second financial bubble is going to soon burst, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. That's because, as Paul stated, the Federal Reserve has set up the American economy for financial collapse, for printing trillions of dollars. Federal Reserve policy has literally set the country up for economic collapse. And though the central bank has been very creative in making the impossible work and putting off disaster, nothing can hold back the flood forever. Unfortunately, it looks like Trump may be blamed for a financial crisis that he didn't cause. Analysts, including notably Brandon Smith, may be correct in pinpointing the attempt to use the new and highly controversial president as a scapegoat for the dirty work of the bankers. The conditions are there, and the consequences were built in when the bubble was still being pumped up. Someday it will burst. When, how, and how bad? President Trump is doing his damnedest to turn around the economy, revitalizing jobs and bring back prosperity. But the larger trends are already in place. The cycle is turning, and the bust cannot be put off forever. Back in 2008 and 2009, the Federal Reserve's policies of printing trillions of dollars back in 08-09 have locked into place a serious financial crisis at some point in our future. Paul stated, getting so far as to intimate the financial collapse